odds, I'll do evens.
So I'm doing the
5.
odds.
Yep, go.
And you're doing the evens. So there's 5.
Okay, hit it.
Okay,
No,
hi.
hey.
Hey, welcome. It's session number 5, and we're talking about the life of David, and we're trying to draw out an idea that we can see in the story, and hopefully maybe you've had the chance over the last few weeks in your own time to read through some of the story of David, or maybe those of you who have fast readers have got through the whole thing, or like me, if you just listen to the audio Bible when you're driving, you can get through quite a bit of the Bible. But the reality is we're looking at the story of David because God says the thing about David before we even see David in the story, when God's talking about the king he wants, he says, I'm going to choose someone with a heart after my heart. Right, which I think is a cool piece of poetry, but it says something about who David is and who David was, right? That he had a heart after God. He was chosen by God, and then he develops this heart of worship, right? He becomes this amazing warrior, and then he goes through this amazing season where he's a fugitive. He's been hunted down by the existing king, who's King Saul, and it goes on and on. And it's this amazing development, and right through, I think it's so important to recognize that who David was pursuing, he had this heart after God, was much more important than what he was doing, right? Whether it's shepherd boy, harp player, giant slayer, fugitive, that's a whole.
He had a few different roles, didn't he?
It's a very varied job description, right? And so whether we're cleaning our house, looking after our kids, preaching a sermon, praying for someone who's unwell, sometimes we think one of those is better than the other, but actually God works through the seasons of our life to prepare us for this gap, right? There's a gap in the future that you're called for. Like there's a gap in the future that you're called to fill that only you can fill. And when that gap happens, you need to be ready. God's going to prepare you, but you need to be ready to step in. And all through this fugitive stage, David's been chased around, he's camping out with the Philistines, the enemies, he's got some friends and some enemies, people turning against him.
You've got to read it because there's a ton of stuff that goes on.
It's an amazing story. Way too long for us to get too bogged down in the weeds, right? But literally he goes from fugitive and the next day, he's king.
So King Saul dies in battle.
King Saul dies in battle.
King Saul dies in battle. He was the king. Wasn't the anointed king, he was the king. Dies in battle. It's almost like the next day, David finds out about it. And we talk about David pursuing God. You've got to read it. He still says to God, shall I go up to, I think it was to Hebron. Shall I go to Hebron? God says, yes, you shall go up. And so again, he's still pursuing God.
He's not
it's
assuming.
Not like he's assuming that, this is my moment now. So he's not sort of like, hey, I'm here. It's a king has arrived. Give me the crown. He still asks God, shall I go up? He goes up, and then it says all the men saw him, and they anointed him king over Judah.
Which is pretty phenomenal, right?
That's
he gets made king.
In a day.
From fugitive king in a day. And what a great story, except if you've been reading it, it was decades of God developing, or just life happening at David, and then God using that to develop him and grow him, and that's true for us as well. That there's going to be moments where we step into something new. Right, and how well we can step into that thing is how well we're working today to allow God to work in us.
Well, it's almost that, Pastor Sam did a series a while ago on that suddenly. Was it Shout last year before? Can't remember. Anyway, it was a moment, it was a suddenly, but the suddenly just didn't happen suddenly. It was as they were marching all night. And then suddenly. So there's never just a suddenly like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, God's divine providence. No, but there's usually exactly.
That's suddenly,
they were praying.
Praying and fasting for 40 days, and then suddenly,
and that's most often,
always that preparation.
You talked last week about God can move sovereignly, in his providence. But probably more often than not, it's actually a lot of work that we've been doing behind the scenes with God, worshiping with him, putting him first, and then the suddenlies tend to happen. And then all of a sudden he's anointed king. It's not usually a surprise, is it, that actually...
Well, if it is a surprise, it's probably not going to go well, right?
That's true.
True. It's because it's all of that preparation that allowed David to be king, but not just be king, to be an amazing king. Right?
So talk about David, because he wasn't, the kingdom of Israel was extended the most under King David's...
well, it was really established, right? So if you think about it from a geopolitical perspective...
Let's think about it like that.
When we think about the people of Israel prior to David, they were like semi-nomadic tribes, right? They weren't a nation with an identity under God.
Almost this sort of city states.
And some of the tribes were worshiping God, and some of them weren't. Some of them were loyal to each other, and some of them weren't. They would fight against each other and war against each other as well, right? And then under Saul, but then it was really under David where they become a nation, right? He establishes Jerusalem as the capital. right? And then it talks about it. It's a real golden age. If you read in the scriptures, it talks about peace, which is a big idea in the Hebrew language. It's about salvation, right? Things start working right.
Yeah.
So peace is that, hey, things start working right. They get order in the society. Things like justice, law and order, all those sorts of things become established as well. So it's not like David's just king. Here's my crown. I'm sitting on the throne. He became king, and then he went to work, right?
Because there'd be the tendency to go, finally. The promise has arrived. God, I've waited years for this. My moment is finally here. But because we go back to David being a man that pursued God's heart.
Yeah, and pursue is a good word, right?
He continued, and that's the distinction. He continued to pursue him throughout his whole life.
Yeah.
He's anointed king. He could have rested in that and gone, wow, sweet, I'm king.
Finally. Well, what a tough journey. And now I'm here.
Now there's peace. Because there was still wars going on. Like, there wasn't quite the age of Solomon. He still had to fight.
Yeah, it was still like.
There were still battles.
It's not like the world today. Like, we're talking thousands and thousands of years ago, right? It's not the world today. There's no international court of justice that you can appeal to. Like, if you want to maintain your nation, in those days, you maintain your nation, right? So he's a warrior king, but he established the borders and he subdued the enemies, right? So that they weren't constantly being attacked, right? And it also meant that there was prosperity.
Yeah.
So that meant that people who were previously hungry weren't hungry anymore. Like, it meant something. The fact that David became king and didn't just sit there, but actually extended and improved the environment that he was now responsible for.
So he extended, that's what we love about David, because he extended the prosperity of the nation, and everybody prospered because David was, again, because he was anointed as king. God knew this was the guy that was going to lead, and because of that, everybody's blessed. It's like all the nations of the earth shall be blessed through Israel.
That's the Abraham blessing.
It's the Abraham blessing. It's the same.
And David is really embodying that. He's really living. He's living out that blessing in his space, right? And so the challenge for you and I, and the challenge for you guys at home, is thinking, well, what are you the king of?
Yeah.
Like, you're responsible for something. Like, even if you're a teenager, do you have your own room? Right? Or do you have some of your own stuff?
I never did.
But do you have some of your own stuff?
Yeah.
Like, you've got some of your clothes, and you've at least got your life.
Yeah.
You've got your studies, right? But for me, I'm like, I've got a family, and we own a house, and we own 2 cars, right? But like, what sort of a king of that space am I? Do you know what I mean? How clean are the cars? Do you know what I mean?
Well, there's a water shortage at the moment.
Not in Wellington, but it looks like there is. But the reality is, sometimes we just rest back, right? But the king doesn't rest back. The king extends, right? And the king improves, right? If I'm going to rule and reign with Christ, like the New Testament says, that doesn't mean, well, I'm the man.
Yeah.
It means, okay, what's my responsibility? What are the things I need to push against and fight against? We don't do that, again, because we're New Testament people. We're not doing that in flesh and blood. There's not enemies we're killing, right? But there's attitudes I need to push down in my family. There's a spirit of unity that I want to develop, right? There's savings that need to happen. There's bills that need to get paid. And really, when we think about David, I think it's really important to recognize it wasn't about him being king. It was about the blessing of God that went to all the people because he was king.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
So
there's a sense that as in his kingly role, he knew that he was there for the welfare and the betterment of society and of people, and and it reminds me of that Jeremiah 29:7. Seek the peace and prosperity of the city that I've called you into exile, because its welfare. So the welfare of, and this was in a foreign land, the welfare of the Babylonians, even those in captivity, their welfare will determine your welfare.
Yeah.
So there's a sense that, when I give you a gift, I'm more excited about you opening the gift and seeing your face than I am necessarily about receiving.
Yeah, totally.
But in that I receive, and it's the sense that David understood that he was there for the welfare of everybody else.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, like let's say you're the assistant manager, right? Let's say you're the assistant sales manager of the team, right?
Yeah. Or a paper factory in Slough.
Yeah. Or you're the assistant manager of a McDonald's, right?
Yeah.
And you think, wow, it'd be awesome to be promoted. Wouldn't that be awesome when I finally get promoted to be the manager? It's like, well, yeah, cool, you get promoted to be the manager. Yeah, but what difference does that make?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm the manager now. Well, you get a promotion maybe, but what is there a blessing that comes to the people who are now part of your influence?
Yeah.
Does it matter to them? And I think that's the big challenge. If we're called to rule and reign, maybe that's got this sort of metaphysical thing for the future. But maybe it means right now, hey, no, there's aspects of the kingdom of God, so righteousness, peace, and joy, that we're called to implement. You know, and I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I like that, and I think I like this thought to finish there. Tommy Tenney wrote a book called "The Power of God" or "God's Power," something like that. But there was a quote in the book, and he's building to a point where he said, "What's the secret to life?"
Yeah,
and he says the secret to life is to give it away.
Wow.
And I thought I really like that. It stuck with me. The secret of life is actually to give it away. It's nice and simple, and I feel like David's life, he becomes king, and he says, "I'm going to give my life away." In the role that I have for the betterment of society and of people.
Yeah.
And I think that's not a bad place for us to live in society. Go, hey, give our life away for this cause we were born. Let's help to grow people and to grow others. And it's just a neat thought, eh?
So good. So in your group right now, have a think about how well are you ruling your kingdom, right? So that might be you've got your own pair of shoes, right? But how well are you ruling that, right?
Yeah.
Or how well you're embodying that kingship of Christ
and stewarding
in the world,
the things
that God's blessed you with. You know, does it make a difference to your neighborhood that you're there? You know,
Yeah.
Because that could be quite a challenging, quite a confronting conversation you could have about that. But we're weeks into this, right?
It's a safe space, though. It's a safe space.
Yeah. But maybe you could talk about a friend. You know, you can always.
His name rhymes with yours. You know.
There's ways to do that. So we'll see you next week. We've got 2 more episodes to talk about this, and it should be awesome.
Week 6 coming up. See you soon.